Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict, ex-crazy person, turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on psychology, spirituality, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about the archetypes of the prince, the princess, and the evil queen. I love mythology and stories. Who doesn't love a good story? Good stories speak to us on a deeper level about the human condition. And great stories, the ones that stand the test of time, like mythology, carry a wisdom or even an instruction in them of how to live, of what to do or what not to do. And some, like the story of Snow White, can be like a guidebook for personal transformation. So the story of Snow White was first released by the Brothers Grimm in the mid-1800s. And then it was made popular by the Disney animated feature Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1938. I found it terrifying when I saw it as a child. So I'll give you a quick overview of the story in case you don't remember or never got to see it. Snow White begins with a queen sitting in an open window during a winter snowfall. And she's sewing, and she pricks her finger with a needle, and 3 drops of red blood drip under the freshly fallen snow. And the queen says to herself, "How I wish that I had a daughter that had skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony." Snow White is born, and the queen dies in childbirth. A year later, Snow White's father, the king, marries again, and his new wife is very beautiful, but she's also vain and wicked. And she possesses a magic mirror, which she asks every morning, "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" And the mirror always tells the queen that she is the fairest. Fair being an old-fashioned word for hot or beautiful. And the queen is always happy because the magic mirror never lies. But as Snow White grows up and becomes more beautiful, the queen also becomes older and less beautiful. And one day the queen asks her mirror, and it tells her that Snow White is the fairest. The queen can't stand this, becomes incredibly jealous, and comes to hate Snow White so much that she eventually orders a huntsman to take Snow White into the forest and kill her. The queen is not kidding around. She tells the hunter, "Bring me back Snow White's heart as proof that you killed her." I don't remember if they left that in the Disney movie, but in the original story, she's going to eat Snow White's heart to become immortal. Eating your enemy's heart is an ancient warrior show of dominance. In fact, as recently as 2013, there was a horrific video of a Syrian rebel commander eating the heart of a dead government soldier. And enemy eating is as old as time, and there's evidence of it in almost every continent in the world. And so the hunter brings Snow White out into the woods, and he can't bear to kill her. She's this gorgeous and completely sweet and pure 14-year-old girl. And so he sends her off into the forest, and he kills a deer instead and brings the deer's heart back to the queen. And Snow White runs off into the dark forest, alone and terrified. And the forces of nature, the little creatures, come to comfort her, and she comes upon this sweet little cottage that belongs to the 7 dwarves. The dwarves go out to the mine to work every day, and nobody's home. So she eats a little food, drinks some of their wine, and then falls asleep in one of the comfortable beds. And when the dwarves come home, she tells them her terrible story, how her stepmother's trying to kill her, and they decide to help her and let her stay with them in exchange for caring for their house. And they come very quickly to love her and tell her to be very careful when she's alone at home and don't let anybody in while they're out working in the mountains. And Snow White continues to live very happily with the dwarves, growing into an absolutely gorgeous, voluptuous young woman. And the queen thinks that she's gotten rid of Snow White. We never hear a peep from the king. And one day, the queen asks her mirror, "Who is the fairest one of all?" And the mirror tells her that not only is Snow White the fairest, but she is also hiding with the dwarves. So the queen decides to take matters into her own hands and kill the girl herself. In the Brothers Grimm story, the queen visits Snow White 3 times. First, she tries to kill her with a corset. Then she tries to kill her with a poisoned comb. And finally, as we see in the Disney film, She brings her a poisoned apple. The queen is a master of disguise, so Snow White never recognizes her. And as soon as Snow White takes a bite of the apple, she falls down in a coma. The dwarves come home. They're horrified. They think that Snow White is dead. They can't bear to bury her. And so they create a glass casket, and she lives in suspended animation. And the dwarves sadly look at her through the glass, unable to connect with her purity and beauty. And the thing about the word fair, or fairest as it's used in this story, is that it's much more than just being hot or beautiful, actually. Fairness is about purity of heart, goodness of soul, innocence, vulnerability. So Snow White is lovable, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, relationally. She's their housemaid. She's a humble girl. She's willing to work hard. And she's very loving and selfless, the complete opposite of the evil queen. So one day, a handsome prince riding through the forest stumbles upon Snow White's glass coffin. He falls instantly in love with her, and it's a little creepy, but he kisses her. His love breaks the spell. They go on to live happily ever after. In the original Brothers Grimm, the queen tries to kill her again, and in the end, when the prince finds out she has tried to kill his wife-to-be, they invite the queen to the wedding, and as punishment, they make her wear a pair of red-hot shoes and dance in them until she drops dead. And then they get married. It's all kind of gruesome, but very instructive. In the Disney story, the dwarves chase the queen up the mountain, and she slips and falls to her death. So what does this children's story have to teach us? Depending on our perspective, there are a lot of different lessons in this tale. Lessons about vanity and jealousy, about aging with grace. On its surface, it's a lesson about rescuing or being rescued in relationship. But I find the story of Snow White most helpful if we look at each of the characters in the story as if it were an aspect of ourself. That whether you're a man, a woman, or non-binary, we all have a prince, a princess, an evil queen, and a community. And if we can really become conscious, intentional, and take responsibility for these aspects of ourselves, this story gives us very clear instructions in how to find unification and fulfillment, even prosperity within ourselves. So these characters or elements are archetypes. And an archetype is a pattern of behavior or the pure form of a characteristic that's shared across all of humanity. The term archetype was made popular by the psychologist Carl Jung, who spent much of his life kind of codifying and clarifying these universal, kind of inherited, unconscious patterns, ideas, ways of being that we all share. So the idea of a prince, a princess, and an evil queen don't actually need a lot of explanation. Although we each have our own relationship with each of those archetypes in our own lives, and how we orient toward those characters within ourselves is not only unique to each person, but it can change at different times in our life. My own relationship with this story is very different at the age of 56 than it was at the age of 26. So what do the prince, the princess, and the evil queen have to teach us? If we can open to the possibility that we each have these aspects in ourself as a human, the princess is our purest, best self. It's our own unique beauty that is naturally connected with and supported by the spirit of the universe or the natural world. It's our vulnerability, our innocence. It's our own unique, quirky, authentic self. In the Brothers Grimm telling of the tale, Snow White is 7 years old when the queen first tries to kill her and sends her out into the woods. And she lives with the dwarves for 10 years before the queen finds her. And from a psychology perspective, usually by the age of 7, our authentic self has been banished into the wilderness of our own unconscious and been taken over, although perhaps very supported, by the community in which we live. The dwarves represent our community, our culture, our religion. Many people experience this as a supportive structure, but culture and community can also serve to keep our authentic self out into the woods of the unconscious. Snow White serves the 7 dwarves in exchange for safety and security. And there's a death rebirth process in connecting with her own internal healthy masculine in the form of the prince, which causes her to leave the community, which often happens when we begin to do personal growth work or self-actualize, particularly in modern life. Self-development often moves individuals out of the community from which they come into the castle of their own prosperity. So the prince is a healthy masculine, has some relationship with the unconscious, is comfortable moving through the forest, connecting with universal life force, but it's incomplete within itself. The healthy masculine needs to care for the healthy feminine. The prince needs the princess as much as the princess needs the prince. The healthy masculine is most empowered when it has a purpose. And this story tells us that the purpose of the healthy masculine is to care for, protect, and support our authentic self. That until we're willing to care for and love our own unique, authentic, vulnerable beauty, our fairness, our own inner, innocent, and magical princess, that our authentic self will live in suspended animation in a glass coffin in our unconscious, pure but untouchable, unconscious itself. We could see these certainly as aspects of the feminine and the masculine, which we could understand as our intellectual and our intuitive selves, our rational and our emotional, our mind and our heart. And can our intellect and our intuition fall in love with each other? How can our rational and our emotional selves come together and be married so that we can move into the castle and rule the kingdom of our own experience? And the prince and the princess stay a prince and princess until they fall in love and support, connect with each other. And once that internal connection, that internal integration or marriage happens, then they become the king and queen. And one of the most notable figures in this story never appears in it, and it's Snow White's father, the king. There is no healthy masculine in this story until the prince shows up. And the healthy masculine has gotten a really bad rap these days with a lot of talk about toxic masculinity and patriarchy. And certainly there is a lot of abusive power. This story is also about abusive power. And it's about an aspect of the unhealthy masculine, which is the impotent masculine. If Snow White's father, if the healthy masculine had been present to support the authentic, vulnerable, innocent girl, then the evil queen never would have got to drive her out. But this is an experience most of us have in modern life, that we don't have the internal strength or structures to be able to support who we really are, what our needs, desires, wants. We lack the power and ability to support our own highest self in the world, in our lives. And so what happens when there's a deficit of healthy masculine within us? Then the evil queen gets to run the show. And the evil queen in the Western psyche is the inner critic, the inner judge. It's rooted in fear, very concerned with appearances. It's terrified of who we really are and drives it deep into our unconscious, tries to kill it. I know mine did. I was at war with my own intuitive, emotional, vulnerable self for decades. Because I was such a deeply feeling person, I thought having feelings was the problem. So I medicated them, distracted away from them, tried to push them down and out, because for many years in my life, who I really am was completely unexpressed in my outer life. I grew up with gun-toting Tea Party Republican parents, and it took me decades and continues to unfold of my process of discovering and supporting who I really am, which is almost comically polar to what I was raised. I live in San Francisco. I practice shamanism. My work is deeply intuitive, and liberal theology is the basis of my life. And it's often a long trek from the castle of our youth and community into the woods, reclaiming our unconscious self, moving it into the new kingdom of our own prosperity and fulfillment. And so the evil queen, Sigmund Freud called it the superego, the inner critic that jealously guards its perceived place in society, our inner enemy. I did a podcast on dissolving the inner critic, and although a lot of modern psychology believes it's a working part of the psyche, I disagree. And Snow White's story corroborates. The evil queen needs to die if we're going to come to full recognition of our authentic self. And as long as the inner critic is in power, who we really are stays buried in a glass coffin in the woods, inaccessible. And the community grieves, whether it knows it or not, because there is a great loss when we don't bring who we really are into the world. And so I encourage you to explore the forest of your own unconscious, to find your own fairest self and fall in love with them, rescue them, bring them to your castle, integrate them into your life, and kill the evil queen. Because although our inner critic is often a protective device meant to keep us in power, it's dysfunctional at best and it's deadly at its worst. And although this podcast is not about suicide, most suicide is an internal evil queen killing the authentic self. So the prince in Snow White, from this perspective, is not someone who comes to save us. It's our willingness to save ourselves and be the hero of our own life. If you like this podcast, share it with a friend. I'd be very grateful for 5 stars and a positive review. And many thanks to my supporters on Patreon. Finishing up my first digital course on Intro to Shamanism, Journeying to the Lower World, should be available in the next few months. If you're interested in finding out how spiritual psychology might benefit you, shoot me an email, info@reneemckenna.com. Blessings on your path until we meet again. This is Renee LaValle McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.